Hey there everybody, I'm Joe Disney Guy and welcome to another edition of Disney Guy Reviews. We have a ton of stuff to get to today, so let's not waste any time and jump straight into Disney's third animated classic, the concert feature, Fantasia. The late 1930s was an exciting time in the Disney studios. The staff was growing, Walt was moving to a larger studio in Burbank, and thanks to the success of Snow White, Walt had financial security for the first time in a long time. But, as Walt always said, he only liked making money if it allowed him to do something bigger, so he got to work on planning his next project. Can we all just take a moment to consider what Walt would do with the multi-billion-dollar company that Disney is today? I'm pretty sure that his imagination would actually explode. Walt had always loved music, particularly putting animation to music, which is a large reason why Disney's Silly Symphony series was started, but Walt wanted to do something even bigger and dove into classical music. Walt also wanted an excuse to relaunch and redesign Mickey Mouse. Walt feared that his happy-go-lucky mascot was becoming too bland, and when compared to the manic, constantly unlucky Donald Duck, Mickey was boring both to audiences and to animators. It was decided that a new look Mickey would star in a short entitled The Sorcerer's Apprentice, based on the song by Paul Dukas. One day, Walt was in a restaurant called Chasen's and happened to run into popular conductor Leopold Stokowski. The two got to talking, and Walt suggested that Stokowski conduct an orchestra to score The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Man, you run into Walt and you get asked to be part of a Disney production? I'd have camped out at Chasen's every single day. Of course, hiring a world-famous conductor and orchestra is not cheap, and the cost of The Sorcerer's Apprentice ran up to $125,000. Roy Disney, who handled the company's finances, was less than thrilled with Walt, citing that there was no way the company could make back its money on such an expensive short. But honestly, could there have been a worse job at the time than Roy's? He was in charge of money for a company run by his brother, who always seemed to actively be trying to bankrupt them. Stokowski, on the other hand, was pushing Walt to make more shorts putting animation to classical music, feeling that it was a way to bring these classics to a mainstream audience. Walt decided to compromise and make everyone happy. He would include The Sorcerer's Apprentice in a film because movies made more money than shorts, as well as include various other shorts featuring classical music. And with that concept, production on Fantasia officially began as Disney's third animated feature. Fantasia was a bit of a different project in that the music selection had to come first. Walt and Stokowski had numerous meetings over which songs would best lend themselves to animation. Some songs were selected and then changed for various reasons. For example, Pierne's Cydalise was originally chosen for the film, but eventually scrapped because Walt felt the music wasn't big enough, and they struggled to give a story to the music. Finally, in April of 1938, the Fantasia setlist began to be finalized, and included Bach's Toccata and Fugue, Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Suite, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony, Ponchielli's Dance of the Hours, Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain, and Schubert's Ave Maria. Debussy's Clair de Lune was also chosen and completely animated before being cut due to runtime. I guess Walt at 2.5 hours may have been pushing it. The choice of The Rite of Spring was definitely the most controversial of these selections, because in 1938 the piece was still relatively new to be included with the likes of Bach and Beethoven. In fact, Stravinsky was the only living composer amongst those whose songs were selected, and at the time he supported Disney using his piece, even signing a photograph to Walt. However, in later years, Stravinsky would go back on his support, saying that he didn't like Stokowski's recording or Disney's interpretation of his music. With the music in place, research began to help the artists better understand what they would be working on. Professional ballet dancers were brought in, and artists studied classical ballet, both to better understand the dance motions and to appreciate the dance as a whole for the Dance of the Hours scene. World-renowned scientists such as naturalist Roy Chapman Andrews, biologist Julian Huxley, paleontologist Barnum Brown, and astronomer Edwin Hubble taught the Disney studio about the early days of Earth for The Rite of Spring. I mean, seriously, was there anyone that Walt couldn't get for Fantasia? It was at this time that Walt elected to not feature the evolution of mammals in the sequence for fear of creationist backlash. Walt also brought in abstract animator and filmmaker Oscar Fischinger to work on the Toccata and Fugue sequence due to its obscure nature. Fischinger actually did too good of a job with his abstract animation, so Walt had to add clouds to not disorient the audience. Walt actually wanted to make this entire sequence in 3D. In 1940. So disorient them, no, but terrify them? Absolutely. Unfortunately, the idea had to be scrapped as costs grew higher and higher. Many risks were taken in the story department. While some scenes, like The Sorcerer's Apprentice, followed the original story being told by the music to the letter, other sequences, such as The Rite of Spring scoring a scene about the evolution of the Earth, diverted a bit from the music's intended story. The most blatant story divergence comes in the Nutcracker Suite, whose widely known Christmas story was changed to a dance of nature. The animation department...
Racist alert! Racist alert! Racist alert!
Racist alert? But what about Fantasia is racist? Oh yeah. Originally, in the Greek scene, there was Sunflower, a servant centaurette. And yeah, it's pretty bad. Thankfully, Disney removed Sunflower starting with the 1969 re-release due to her portraying a negative stereotype. Now, as I was saying, the animation department took their fair share of risks as well. Aside from Fishinger's abstract art, some of the sequences were much more realistic and darker than Disney animation usually was, particularly the dinosaurs in The Rite of Spring and Chernabog, the incarnation of evil seen in the Night on Bald Mountain sequence. Fun fact, famed horror actor Bela Lugosi was the original live-action reference for Chernabog, but the animators disliked how it turned out and they opted to use a shirtless animator as a reference instead. I don't know though, I kinda see the resemblance. The biggest risk taken, however, was the grand redesign of the company's mascot, Mickey Mouse. Animator Fred Moore is credited with Mickey's redesign, and the first change he made was changing Mickey's body from a circular shape to a more pear shape. Moore also changed Mickey's eyes. At the time, Mickey had basically black slits for eyes. Now, Mickey was given full eyes with pupils to help make him more expressive. Moore's redesign of Mickey was so successful that his basic yet important changes are still a part of Mickey's design today. Effects animation again took center stage with the advent of the Process Lab, a division of the animation department that handled the filming of special effects. Most of the Process Lab's work can be seen in The Rite of Spring, including filming upside-down paint cans in water to imitate smoke, and bubbling mud vats to create tar pits. Effects aside, the animation on Fantasia was a major undertaking. For the Nutcracker suite, due to various techniques being used to make the cells, including transferring, airbrushing, and dry brushing, 1/24th of a second of animation on screen took the studio 3 to 4 hours to make. So let's do the math here for a second. It took Disney animators 4 hours to complete 1/24th of a second of film. That's about 96 hours for every second of film. 60 seconds in a minute means that we're looking at about 5,760 man-hours for every minute on screen. That's about 240 days for those of you counting at home. Whoa. The balance between seriousness and comedy was also a delicate issue during the making of Fantasia. Walt wanted the film to have a more serious tone to it, but didn't want to seem too highbrow. In order to achieve this, Walt made some changes to the film, such as changing its title from the bland concert feature to a more fun name, Fantasia. One of the film's most famous sequences, the dance on the mushrooms in the Nutcracker suite, was actually based off of the Three Stooges. Other elements, such as a gag where the chimes of the orchestra fall, and really the entire Dance of the Hour sequence, which parodied the trend of musical numbers in films at the time, were added to try and keep some lightness in the movie. But of course, any movie based around classical music needs to have great sound, which gave Walt and Stokowski a perfect excuse to develop a new sound system for films, appropriately dubbed Fantasound. Instead of recording Stokowski's orchestra from one point, as most sound was recorded back then, lead audio technician William E. Garrity placed different microphones around the orchestra to record stereophonic sound, the illusion that sound is coming from different directions. Essentially, the idea was to make the audience feel like they were listening to a live orchestra in the theater with them. The film's ending also took some technical wizardry. Because of the scale and precision of the candlelit processional at the end of the film, any inconsistencies in the cells or their shooting made the figures appear like they were shaking. In order to properly shoot the scene, it took 9 men, over 6 full days and nights, a horizontal multiplane camera, and a 154-foot soundstage to get it done. The shot was finally completed and added to the finished product about 4 hours before the film's premiere. Twice during the shooting of this sequence, the filming schedule interfered with Walt's weekly badminton game that he held in the sound studio. Walt only canceled one match, because even in the face of a deadline, badminton comes first. As for the premiere itself, Walt made sure to choose an actual theater venue as opposed to a movie theater to better simulate going to an orchestra concert. Walt even set up the entire Fantasia experience, from programs to lighting to even curtain movement, and on November 13, 1940, Fantasia premiered at the Broadway Theater in New York City. So, I know that this may seem a bit blasphemous, but I actually didn't particularly enjoy Fantasia. No, just hear me out. First, let's look at what I did like. The animation, as always, is great, and I like the very differing styles of animation presented in the film. You get a bit of everything, from the funny, to the scary, to the cartoony, to the realistic. It's also very hard to complain about the music, as these songs are classics, and being someone who enjoys music, I can appreciate them. I enjoyed Mickey's redesign, as well as really the entire Sorcerer's Apprentice sequence, even if Mickey is a cold-blooded murderer in it. That poor broom. But now for the part you all want to hear. What I didn't like. Really, it boils down to what I mentioned in the Pinocchio review. I like one comprehensive story, and obviously Fantasia is the opposite of that. While I definitely enjoyed some segments such as the Dance of the Hours, and found others interesting like the Pastoral Symphony, admit it is kind of cool seeing Disney's interpretations on characters such as Zeus almost 60 years before Hercules came out. Other segments, mainly the more abstract ones, lost my interest. The hit and miss of my enjoyment of these segments is really what turned me off to the movie. That and the intros from Deems Taylor kind of annoyed me. I mean, I get that you have to explain some of the scenes for younger viewers, but I mean, just listen to this.
Bald Mountain, according to tradition, is the gathering place of Satan and his followers. Here on Walpurgis Night, which is the equivalent of our own Halloween, the creatures of evil gather to worship their master. Under his spell, they dance furiously, until the coming of dawn and the sounds of church bells send the infernal army slinking back into their abodes of darkness.
I mean, why even watch? He just told me exactly what was going to happen. Also, Fantasia is incredibly long at 128 minutes. To give some perspective, Snow White was only 83 minutes long, so Fantasia can really feel like a grind at times. Now, to be honest, rewatching and learning more about Fantasia for this review has caused me to become more appreciative of the film. And now knowing that Walt intended for this to be a concert feature as opposed to a movie, maybe my problem isn't that I didn't like Fantasia so much as I don't like concert features. With all of that in mind, I think I can safely say that Fantasia is successful at being a concert feature, even if I don't care for it much as a movie. However, I still wholeheartedly recommend that people watch Fantasia at least once and form their own opinions about it. Hey, if nothing else, you'll at least be exposed to some great animation and some great music. That's never a bad thing, right? Much like Pinocchio, Fantasia faced financial struggles in its initial run. The problem for Fantasia was twofold. For one, people weren't sure how to react to the film. Some audiences felt that Disney had gone too highbrow, and even critics were split. Movie critics seemed to generally enjoy the film, but music critics cried that Disney had butchered these classical masterpieces by putting them to animation. The other problem was the cost and difficulty of even putting Fantasia into a theater. It cost $85,000 to equip a theater to play Fantasia, only 12 theaters at a time were able to have Fantasound, and only 16 prints of the movie were even in use at any given time. Disney's distributor, RKO Pictures, wanted nothing to do with the project in its initial run, and after a year-long run in New York and Los Angeles, the film that cost $2.28 million to make had turned a profit of $1.3 million. Which was a minuscule profit once you factored in how much it cost to properly equip the theaters as well. Originally, Walt had planned for Fantasia to be an ever-changing and evolving movie that could be a totally different experience every time it was re-released. Animation, recordings, and even narration for a few new scenes, such as the Clair de Lune, the Swan of Twanella, and the Ride of the Valkyries, were all started but cancelled after Fantasia's initial flop, and this failure would stick with Walt for the rest of his life. RKO Pictures ended up distributing Fantasia after all, initially shaving off over an hour of its runtime, and the film was re-released 9 times, in 1942, 1946, 1956, 1963, 1969, 1977, 1982, 1985, and 1990. Today, the film has grossed over $76.4 million domestically, placing it as the 22nd highest grossing film of all time. Fantasia has also received a host of honors as well, including 2 honorary Academy Awards, being named to the National Film Registry in 1990, being named the number 5 animated film of all time by the American Film Institute, and even being named to a list of 45 great art films by the Vatican. I'm gonna be honest here, didn't know the Pope watched movies. Fantasia's legacy on the film industry stretched beyond just awards, however. In the Disney company, Fantasia would influence many of the compilation films that would come out during the wartime era, and in 1999, Walt's vision to see an updated Fantasia was partially realized with a pseudo-sequel, Fantasia 2000. Elsewhere, the Rite of Spring scene was actually seen in schools to explain evolution, and Fantasound would go on to be a precursor to surround sound as we know it today. So although it was a bumpy ride for Fantasia at times, there's no denying that Disney's concert feature has definitely left a lasting legacy on the Disney company and film as a whole. Well guys, that about wraps it up for today. I hope you all enjoyed, and tell me what you think about Fantasia in the comment section below. I'd be very interested to see what everyone's opinion on it is. Be sure to like me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter, links down below, as well as check out last week's video, next week's video, and the last Disney Guy review. I'll see you all next week.